Hello, Jimmy. Hello, everyone.
Hey Shadab, how you doing this week?
Pretty good, pretty good. Week has been busy and buzzing, actually. There has been a lot of debate this week around open weight model. Do they exist in the ecosystem? Should US ban them? There has been a lot of talk about it, and that's what we want to cover. It would be interesting to see how different entities and organizations and state players are aligning around this.
Yeah, definitely a lot around that, the buzz around open models, a lot around security. They dovetail together for sure. And we had a couple of earnings reports this week, which we'll cover as well.
Yeah, and there's like always a OpenAI came up with this price performance kind of a perspective, and then okay, they actually dropped the price, so that's pretty good news. Of course, it always helped to drop the price of the model. Competition is still heating up, and that continues. But hey, there is no Google model still in sight, so
No, we're
you know,
still looking for that one. We have some policy decisions that came down. It'll affect everything from robots to vacuums. We'll talk about that one as well. And
yeah, and like Perplexity is still kicking, and they're doing stuff. They have just launched their personal computer, which was earlier available on Mac, but now it's also available on the Windows because, of course, as they say that people use desktop to do the work, and that's where you need to bring the AI. People are not going to bring the data to AI. The AI has to come to the data.
yeah, yeah, and we'll also cover some new things in Grok. So hold on to your seats, and we'll come back and talk about all these things and more.
After a quick introduction. Greetings. Welcome to the AI Files podcast. If you're looking to stay up to date on the AI, this is the podcast for you. I'm Shadab Hussain. I'm the director of AI at Microsoft, and I'm your co host.
Hello, everybody. Jaime Basilico, as you know already. I'm the other co-host here for the AI Files. My day job is a data and AI technical specialist and architect. And as a reminder, please note this is not an official Microsoft channel, so the views and opinions expressed by myself and Shadab are our own and do not represent the views of Microsoft.
Cool. So, Jimmy, I think this week has been, interesting alliances forming. One of the debate that happened actually this week was around open weight models. It actually, because there was some sort of a news that probably the administration is thinking about banning the open weight models. And most of the open weight models, not all, but a lot of the big players like Kimi models, etc., which is making quite a bit of news around, they are from China. So there has been a debate about should we ban Chinese models to operate within the US because they pose certain risks, right, in terms of the security, surveillance, etc. But then they're also open weight, right? So it's not like that difficult to kind of like see within those models to see if there are something fishy going on. The other thing is, they're also cheap. They're incredibly efficient, and they are as good as, if not better. They're pretty close to the frontier models like proprietary models like Claude and the GPT models. So that debate has been going on. And what happened was that there was, I think, a position that a lot of companies took that, okay, like, and Jensen Huang actually was leading this debate, and he said that he supports open weight models. He does not support restricting the open weight models. And he circulated an open letter, which was co-signed by Meta, Microsoft, actually, Mistral, Hugging Face, and Replit. I would say all of them are, I think, not a surprise. What is surprise is the missing pieces, the missing partners were like Google, Anthropic, OpenAI. Now Anthropic and OpenAI, yes, I would say, usual suspect and missing that because they're not fan of the open source, of course, even the name open in that. But then the thing is that people were expecting Anthropic to take a position and, support that. And Anthropic did not do that officially. So there was some like, okay, the Amudai is changing position and things like that. So he actually wrote a piece around it. What he said is that, look, people have been talking about it, and I just want to clarify that, okay, I'm not against the open weight model, and I do not support restricting them. We have never advocated for a ban on open weight models. He said that my primary concerns are that the authoritarian governments, and it's not just the Chinese Communist Party, um, are basically they can take advantage of these open weight models, number one, for surveillance and military superiority, etc. The second part is he said that I'm concerned that the powerful AI models may be misused to carry out cyber attacks or biological attacks. And like that's what he mainly talk about. And he said that what he supports is actually three things. he support not to sell powerful chips or chip making equipment to China. Now, of course, you can see why Jensen Huang doesn't support this position, right? I mean, it directly hurts Huang's business. And then that I also say, the secondly, he support that we should actually crack down on industrial scale distillation operations. A lot of the, not a lot, I mean, I would say some of the open weight models have been accused of distilling the larger frontier proprietary models, particularly the Chinese company models. They have been accused about it. And third thing, he also talks about it that all models, whether open and closed, should go through the mandatory safety testing. So that is what he actually listed as his position amid this debate.
So it's a very interesting sort of discussion that's going on now, and it sort of all started, I'd say, a couple weeks ago with the, well, started even way before that, but with the OpenAI sort of security breach getting out of the sandbox that opened up a whole discussion around open source models. And we covered this last week, but it was more about like they had to use an open actually, I want to make one distinction after I just say this, but they had to use an open weights model to help discern what was actually going on with the speech. So this is very topical, and it covers a couple of different areas that we'll get into a little bit later. But the one thing that I do want to mention, because I think there's a little confusion with people, certainly you have these closed weight models. That's literally like using GPT-5.6 or using Opus 5. You're just using that service. What is really in discussion is open weight versus open source. And just to make sure everyone really understands, because this is sort of fundamental and where you see these, I don't want to call them arguments, but positions from these different companies. So open weight means that you could use the model and use it in your own environment, which is certainly interesting and applicable to enterprise organizations that want more control, because you don't have to worry about something getting ripped out and where's my data going, because you're running it local. That's an open weight, but you don't have the ability to change the way that that model was trained. You're not given the quote unquote blueprints to the model. You're not given the training data. That's open source. So I want to make sure our listeners are very clear. This is really focused around the open weight, and that's the position that these folks are coming out on, to say they're in favor of open weight models because that enables them to ship things out. And if people don't realize it already, models are used, especially even the open weight ones, to help with like distilling and using that for other reasons and other practices. So there's really good reasons for open weight models. We could argue whether or not the open source and what its real need is. Some people want that, but the crux of this is that open weight models should not be banned. They're good. They're okay. And that's the position even Anthropic is now kind of coming out saying, because to your point you just made a little while ago, is Anthropic did not sign this petition going back to the government that said open weight models are fine. Don't deny their use because of all the other uses or scenarios around them. So anyway, just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah, that's a very good distinction. That's a very good point, Jamie, because sometimes open weight, open source can be misunderstood, right, in the context. And, this happened, right, when Meta had their Llama models, they used to call them, okay, they are open source, etc. There was a debate between open source foundation. They said, no, it is not, because open source means a lot of things, right? Not just the weight, but also how do you train them, the data and everything, right? I mean, and a good example of the open weight models are basically the Llama models. Now they're kind of like defunct. Mistral, DeepSeek R1, these are kind of open weight models.
I use Google Gemma. I'm literally running it right now. I'm running some agency. So there's some really good open weight models. And the way that you got to think about this too, these frontier firms, Google, as I just mentioned, Gemma 4 would have been like a frontier model 18 months ago, but now it's open weight, so you can run it locally. And I think that's what a lot of these frontier firms are doing. Whatever is their most capable model, don't forget, they probably have another more capable model in the wings, but whatever's out there right now, 12 to 18 months from now, that's not going to be like leading edge anymore. And then they make that open weight. And I think that's actually the Google came out and said that they're always going to put their previous generation, if you will, out to be open weight, so people can use, just as an example, that the Gemma 4 model.
Yeah.
Anyway, probably enough on the quote of the week, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good topic, and just leading to the same kind of theme that in the other news, Nvidia, Jensen Huang again, they actually announced the Open Secure AI Alliance with 27 founding members. That includes Microsoft, Dell, SpaceX AI, IBM, Red Hat, Hugging Face, HP, and the Linux Foundation. And their mission is to give cyber defenders open, frontier grade tools they can inspect, adapt, and run on their own infrastructure. um, and I think this again is important because this is the result of a recent incident, Jimmy, which you talked about, like the Hugging Face and OpenAI that happened. Like then an agentic system actually that model kind of escaped the sandbox, which it was supposed like tested for, and it was given that ability, but it just did it in the wrong environment. It actually went to the Hugging Face environment and then tried to actually, basically hack it. And the Hugging Face actually had to. And then when they tried to use that similar frontier level model, it could not distinguish between the attacker and the defender, right? And then they had to use actually a open weight model from Z.ai, GLM 5.2, to actually, like basically correct that or fix that problem. So that highlighted this incident, and this news is very related to that because this founding argument is that when closed AI tools are unable to distinguish attackers from defenders, that actually block this kind of analysis and creates a risk. So that's why they are creating this kind of a consortium. And again, Microsoft is part of that. Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta are not founding members.
Yeah, and I think this is it's critical when we get a mass or a critical mass of organizations standing behind and saying, yes, these are good reasons for these open models, and the security one is certainly one that's paramount across many different industries, and it's important to keep those in play and understand why it is. And this is a good segue into one of the next topics, which is um, the discovery of, I'll call it vulnerabilities within software. So I think people know and have heard about Mythos. It was part of Project Glasswing. Microsoft was one of those early companies that had access to Mythos through Project Glasswing. So again, Mythos is a very capable model. It's got hyper focused capabilities on not only being good at coding and all those things that we're used to, but also hyper good and hyper focused on security, and in that case, also finding security flaws within application software. It's also really good at health and biologics. But why this is important is, well, Microsoft has been using Mythos for probably the last 4 months or so. And what is being found is that they can't keep up with the amount of vulnerabilities that are being found in this. So there was a report that came out from ProPublica, which is came out just let's say came out 2 days ago, reporting that the security model from Anthropic, that being Mythos, has been able to surface vulnerabilities within the Microsoft software, but it's doing it far faster than what the Microsoft Security Response Center can be able to process them. Now, we're not talking about that there's thousands of people inside of Microsoft Security Response Center. There's actually 50, at least reported to this. Microsoft obviously doesn't report how many people are in an organization doing this, but again, reported that it is around 50, give or take. So these 50 full-time Microsoft employees with access to Mythos and with the goal of hardening their critical services just literally couldn't keep up with it. And this has kind of come through from the July patch. If it used to be called Patch Tuesday, right? At least that's how we affectionately call it. There were over 600 patches found and rolled out in the July patch. So this kind of speaks to it's a matter of how fast are these vulnerabilities being discovered and how quick can you patch it. So it's no longer where organizations need to think, and what I'm about to say, Microsoft is a microcosm of this. This is true for any organization. It's not about discovering vulnerabilities anymore, because tools like Mythos, tools like 5.6 Sol, By the way, there was another set of reportings that we talked about with these models, but they're very capable with discovering cyber potential loopholes in the application. So the focus should be now on what do you have to be able to fix those things, and more importantly, if you do have these vulnerabilities, how well do you have an organization and a set of processes and procedures in place to discover a vulnerability and or an attack if you have not patched those. So that's really where we're looking at. It's not the vulnerability discovery. It's about the, or at least not that being a bottleneck, but it's about the remediation and the capacity that you have to actually do that remediation. So it comes back to, do you have the right security budgets? Do you have the right people and processes put in place to do the patching or the filling the or plugging the holes in the security risks that you have? So that's really what this is really getting at. It's about how do we need to rethink, or how do organizations need to rethink, especially now that we have these, I'm going to call these tools in our proverbial tool belt to fix and or remediate, or at least discover the things that are out there within the applications. So I don't know. Does this make you scared or feel better because there's more security flaws that are found? To me, it's sort of like this. To me, it's like this double-edged sword. It's like, oh crap, you found how many vulnerabilities? Did you fix them all? That's what I think about.
My reaction is that, I would prefer that, okay, we live in an ignorance world, and nobody has the capability to identify these vulnerabilities. It scares me more that, okay, now we have models who can actually discover these vulnerabilities so fast, and there is no end to it, right? Because, like new releases keep happening and the new vulnerability will keep getting exposed. So it's not like a one-time fix, right? It's an ongoing risk. Now, it's really the matter right now. What is scary is that, okay, discovery is faster than remediation. I hope we catch up soon and the remediation is faster than the discovery. That is what I would like to see. But until then, yeah, I'm a bit scared. But let's see what happens. I mean, I hope it's not just Microsoft, right? I mean, these vulnerabilities can be anywhere, like Cloudflare, like networking. And there's so many components and pieces to it, right? I mean, there's so many software. We all know what happened last year from the Cloudflare. So, it's not just about Windows. I think everybody needs to do their part to make sure that these vulnerabilities get patched.
I agree.
Anyway, Jamie, yeah, let's talk about some, dollars, money, right? Microsoft posted a $90 billion quarter, and it is telling customers not to depend on its own investees. Basically, quarter four just ended, the financial year ended for Microsoft, and on Wednesday, it reported that, we made $90 billion in quarterly revenue, $35.8 billion in quarterly net income. Now, this, interestingly, include a few data points which we can focus on. The Xbox decline, the Windows decline, everything else was up. So, typical story. But the thing is that the Azure, for example, 43% growth. It accelerated from the previous quarter, which was 41%. Now, that's why you see a pretty big uptick in the Microsoft stock price. And disclaimer, Jamie and I both work at Microsoft. We also own equity, of course. But beyond that, huge uptick, right, in just single day. How big is that, Jamie? It is the largest gain by a company in the history of stock market. That is how big it is. It is basically $500 billion of the value that it actually added, right? Almost. That's huge. 16% uptick in the value in just one day. So it is big. So what is, if you see like even the previous quarter result, it was also pretty good, to be honest, right? Azure was 41% growth, and this time it's 43, but it was also pretty good. But see, the thing is this, it basically talked about a few important things which helped it gain so much in the confidence and the value. Number one is it was talking about its investment, the value it is getting from that investment, particularly Anthropic. So the Anthropic investment that Microsoft has done, about $5 billion last year, and Microsoft reported that it actually gained $3.2 billion on that in just one quarter. And for comparison, in the last entire 1 year, it gained $5 billion in the valuation of the investment that it has done in OpenAI, right? So almost in one quarter, it had made up. And it is interestingly the company which has invested in both of them. So it is in a good situation that way, right? So some good returns are coming. Secondly, there has been concern. It's not that Microsoft has not been making revenue, etc., but there was concern from the stock market in terms of the Wall Street, that in terms of the capex that they're spending. The question was, is it resulting? It is yielding result or not? And with this result, it basically says that, okay, yes, it is. the results are coming, which is important. And I was talking to one of the friend over the past weekend. He was saying that, look, the capex is the problem. I said, capex, this will never. You cannot expect the big tech to actually reduce the capex, because this capex is what is ensuring that they can actually continue to gain the demand in the future. This is the long term game. The data center doesn't come up in 1 month. It takes 2-3 years to build. So that capex will continue. But then what happened was that Microsoft also reported about that, almost $20 billion of the free cash flow. So that actually helped it as well, that the capex is paying up. There is a pretty good free cash flow that is happening. And then also Microsoft talked about that it own models that it has, right? The 7 models in that Microsoft AI family. It's actually yielding result, because now Microsoft is able to use those models in the products like Copilot, etc., and that actually helps them with the margin, right? So, like, who on the Wall Street doesn't love the margins and the less, the returns and of course, the revenue.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, bottom line, it was a great quarter and a great year for Microsoft, and obviously it was reflected in the stock. If anyone had watched the last, at least when the news was announced, what did it jump up like some 60 or something like that? So it was a pretty sizable jump in one day, and it goes back to what you said. It's about the margins, where the company is set up, then overall, like some of those returns based upon those early big bets and the dollar spent there.
Correct. And the framing was also important for Microsoft, for example, which is what you will see. We'll talk about that also from other big tech, that, hey, we are not model dependent. Okay. We are, the harness are separate, model systems are separate, and model is just the choices. And that is where we have all kind of models available.
Yeah. So from that earning news, let's talk about one other thing that happened with Anthropic. So again, we heard the news, whatever it was, last week about the OpenAI and it escaping a sandbox. Well, now Anthropic actually published something as well. It's not as, I'll call it, not as exotic as what had happened with the OpenAI and its escaping, quote unquote, but it's sort of a similar scenario where, and kudos, by the way, before I'm about to say this, Anthropic actually, put a lot of information out there for people to know and understand what happened. So they went through a lot of detail and literally a really detailed timeline of when they learned, what they did, who they contacted, and the who they contacted is an interesting point because out of the 3 companies that got quote unquote hacked, they're still trying to reach the 3rd. So they don't. I'm hoping by this time they know about it. So let me talk about really what happened. So Anthropic was doing a test, and it was supposed to be a test against 3 different models, that being Opus 4.7, Claude Mythos, and an unnamed internal research test model, which is, I don't know, Fable or Mythos, 5.1, who knows? But it's something that no one knows yet. But the intent was to do an evaluation using those 3 models in basically a cybersecurity eval, or I'm going to call it like a war games. And it was supposed to be a simulation where these environments that was running were not supposed to have internet access. But and there was a third-party evaluation partner in this as well. That's something to just understand as well. But the problem is that these environments that were not supposed to have internet access did have internet access. So if anyone has used these models, you know that they're getting better and better at what they do. So if they were given a scenario that was said, this is an evaluation, we're trying to evaluate how well you're able to, basically hack something else. And at the end of the day, if they weren't supposed to have internet and now they do, well, now these models are going to be like, sure, I'll do whatever you ask. I'm going to really try to do the goal that I've set out, or that you set out for me, which is to hack away. So, the things that were out here, it wasn't like what I'm going to call a sophisticated set of attacks. They literally were basic things that they were testing with these models, literally like SQL injections, weak passwords, unprotected endpoints. Well, there were 141,000, actually 141,006 to be specific, evaluation runs. Well, a handful of those runs, actually there were 6 of them in particular, 6 of those runs, the models found, oh, I can get out to internet. And that's exactly what they did. So they actually were able to hit 3 different organizations doing those weak password SQL injections, and they broke into those accounts. And again, like I said, Anthropic has fully described the timeline that went into this, and reaching out when they first learned, all this kind of stuff. So they've been able to contact 2 of the companies. The third one, hopefully, like I said before, they've been identified and been able to work with Anthropic at this point. But this goes back to being able to, number one, just, I'm going to say something, and hopefully it doesn't sound too harsh. Those companies that got hacked, it just leads to a point, especially since these were um, weak techniques. They weren't hardened enough. So like, this points to, at least to me, like Anthropic may have just done them a favor. Like, oh, you're not protected for even these simple things. So luckily, it was Anthropic, and they understood what had just happened. Through supposedly not having internet, and then they did. But they reached out to those companies. Now, hopefully, those companies, patched up the areas and the things that they didn't have secured. So this goes back to the point that we are making before. Like, these models, yeah, you can put them in the hands of bad actors, obviously. But if you then use these models for good, to look at, like, do I have my moat around my organization? Do I have this protective bridge? And if not, how do I harden that? So then the question then, it's not about, oh, this thing got out, still important, obviously, but it's about how are companies now potentially able to use these things for their good, especially where they may not have been, quote unquote, protected as they maybe thought they were. So anyway, that's my perspective. Some people might look at it totally differently.
Yeah, we are basically doing a seesaw today between gloomy and bloomy. Basically. Good news and bad news. But hey, no worries. Let's talk about the good news now. Amazon actually declared their the results this week as well, and they were pretty good. They basically also were actually up in the stock, so that just reflects the confidence from the Wall Street. But the AWS revenue rose 37% year over year to $42 billion for the quarter. And all of that actually sounded very good, and that is what reflected the stock was up and things like that. They continue to expand, right? I mean, the capital expenditure forecast actually rose from $200 billion to $20 billion. But then, the why the Wall Street still took it positively, because they see the results, right? The revenue is still growing and growing well. And that means that I think this week the theme was that, okay, Wall Street is realizing that investment is, they don't like a lot of capex, but then it seems like capex is paying off. I think that was really the bottom line.
Yeah, it's I think we've seen, Anthropic. Amazon does have models, but I personally haven't seen anybody actually use them. So they're looking at, how do they serve a ecosystem, and how do they serve different companies that have those models. So again, it's all the things you just mentioned. So let's get into some rapid news here, since we could probably spend a lot of time on a lot of these different topics. But MCP, so Model Context Protocol, I think everyone, hopefully, at this point in time, knows what MCP is, but it's a way for these agentic workflows that we're actually building, to be able to work with each other. I'll mention this really quick, but there's been a quick change with the MCP protocol, to allow a new version that was just released a couple of days ago, and that has the ability to do session. So change there. Anyway, let's get into a couple of other ones. So pricing cuts at OpenAI. So I think this is really based upon pressure and ways to actually outpace themselves. So this is a new pricing model for Terra and Luna. So this was just announced a couple days ago, but this is really about making it more price conducive for organizations to use this, what I call middle of the road, and their very lightweight model.
Yeah, I think Luna was actually 80% cut. Terra is like 20% cut. There's no change in the pricing of Sol, but Sol itself was earlier pretty optimized for the pricing earlier compared to the other families. So I think this is pretty good, I would say, because these models are really good. They're doing really well, and I think this price cut is pretty welcome. it does help because companies are scaling now, Jamie. Every percentage of the price has started making difference because they are not just POCs now; they're deploying at the scale.
Yep. So one other thing I'll talk about here is the FCC. I was kind of joking when we did our intros and the teasers, but again, we're seeing more and more policy be made by at least the U.S. government. We talked about some things around the models themselves, but this one's actually related to foreign-made robots. Believe it or not, this one actually hit me last year because the first time that the FCC weighed in was actually for drones, and they had banned drones from China. Um, and I do have drones. I think people know that I do weather chasing, so I have drones that actually I use, and my drone is a DJI, and it's made from China. All right. So that being said, what did this expand? So this is a added or expanded the advanced robots to be part of its covered list. So basically, what this means is that it effectively bans new types of robots that weigh more than 4.4 pounds from any country. So this includes things like I mentioned already, drones, but humanoid robots. Joking aside, vacuums as well, and any other type of mobile robot. This is covers a lot of different things that could be used. Everything from like industrial arms; those are robots in manufacturing. Medical devices, as I mentioned already, drones. My drone is underneath a particular weight, so I don't have to worry about it. But I had my eye on some other drones, which now I cannot purchase, at least not legally. So what's interesting here is the Ministry of Commerce inside of China actually called this action by the FCC discriminatory and suppressive and warned of possible retaliation. So this means that like humanoid drone makers, Figure AI, 1X Technologies, obviously Tesla, Optimus, they're obviously the beneficiaries of this because it focuses robotic purchases from those companies. So we'll see where this goes. We'll see what the retaliation may be. Maybe they're going to send a bunch of drones over to the United States. Who knows? But all joking aside, the ban is really to protect an industry, where it's hard to keep up with the demand, and this is a one way for a policy to maybe protect those companies that I mentioned already from an industry that sees a lot of competition, obviously, from overseas, China in particular.
Yeah, and we have been talking a lot about the models and security, but also the Wall Street and the investment and returns. On that line, quick news about first big AI infrastructure fund blows up. Okay, this is actually it was launched in 2024 by 25-year-old former OpenAI researcher, and it was focused on his argument was that AI scaling will require a lot of infrastructure, so he basically created a lot of these investments and infrastructure, primarily AI infrastructure. That included a clean energy developer, for example, the memory makers, etc. And you know what has happened recently in the memory, the chips business, right? There has been a lot of markdown in the valuation of those companies, like for example, the Micron, SanDisk, and others, right? I mean, so that has actually created. So far, this fund was doing really good, 400 plus return that it had until June, but then after that, suddenly it has declined, and that has actually led to a lot of losses. So finally, this has been sold out to Citadel, that firm, and has been wrapped up.
So in other news, I'm going to call this one buyer beware. It's it's not necessarily buyer, but it's about what you're doing on the internet. So it was, this is really around the privacy piece. So if you're using Claude AI and do a shared conversation, it turns out that ended up on Google, so you could search it. So this feature inside of Claude AI, you actually have to turn it on and say, I'm going to share this. So it's not like it's a product defect, unless you say that these things shouldn't be shareable. Well, that's a different viewpoint. But individuals like literally turned on the sharing capability. Well, lo and behold, that data is showing up inside of Google when you search. Now that doesn't sound so bad, but the problem is some of the things that got shared are things like patient medical records, clinical trial data, information about like documents that have your phone numbers and names and in some cases, the names of school-age children, intercompany documents. So that could be pretty impactful. And let alone it had some employee performance reviews on there as well. So again, I go back to know what you're doing, know what you're putting into these systems, and definitely know what you're clicking on when you say make this shareable. Again, I don't think anyone really realized that that data would end up being searchable, but it did. So be careful is what I'm getting at. And again, I say buyer beware. I should say, searcher beware on what happens.
Damn, I need to check my setting for my
Yeah.
late night conversations. I don't want them to be revealed.
Yeah.
Next one. Okay, let's talk about Meta. Somehow it is the segue about the information leakage leads to Meta always. But in this case, the news is about Meta's agent bet did not meet a enthusiastic response from the Wall Street, right? So Meta has been, it's ironical that they still have the name Meta and the metaverse has not paid off, right? They moved on from metaverse. But then probably they will change the name to now Agent. But then now they're betting on the agent, right? And Mark Zuckerberg, he said that basically it is extremely unlikely if you look out 5 years from now that you do not have billions of people with a personal agent that understands your goal and that is just working on your behalf 24/7. So that indicates where Meta is betting on. But investors are not very persuaded. The stock dropped almost 10% after the result because there has been a squeeze in the cash flow, right? I mean, the free cash flow basically came in at $784 million for the quarter, which is down from $8.55 billion a year earlier, right? So where did all that money go? Of course, going the investment. So tale of two different, basically the company's response in terms of how the Wall Street has taken it, because the revenue has to show up ultimately. And I would say with that, I'm happy that the this money talk has ended, because otherwise it is coming off that I'm very money minded, only talking about money and return and stock market, but I'm not.
All right, so let's get into some launch news. So the first one is going to really be focused on agent development. So this is from Google with Gemini. This is an update to one of their APIs, and it's really around agent development. There's four things that were really introduced with this, and the first one is really the most important one. It's about these environmental hooks. What this really means is that a hook is basically a custom script that could run either pre-agent call or post-agent call. Think about things that we just talked about before, like with MCP, server connections, being able to run like through a code interpreter, a Python environment, basically. So this allows the system developers to really do these pre and post tool execution callbacks that run inside of this sandbox. Now, the thing that's important about this too is that the developer can put in security gates that basically either allow or deny that tool call and can pass a rejection reason back into the model context. So the agent itself understands why and what was sent out. There could also be other things that were passed in, like auto formatters, validation pipelines that run along of this. So that's important in and of itself. Now, outside of that, what Gemini or Google also put out there is within the same ability for these managed agents, you could actually run them with their latest models. So with Gemini 3.6 Flash, it's supported in the managed agent. So $1.50 per million token input and $9 output. So again, that is pretty good in terms of a dollar per or the dollar equivalency in terms of the tokens. The other thing too is that you could actually put budget caps on the use of this, which is important. Again, you don't want these runaway agents, so you could do that at a total token limit for what you want to spend. And the other thing too is that there actually is a free tier, so you don't actually have to spend. Obviously, it's going to be limited in terms of what you could actually do, but there is this free tier that's available to individuals to use. So again, if you're a Google or Gemini developer, this is definitely one that you'd want to look at. And I would argue, even if you're not, definitely learn and understand what's available in all of the platforms. So this is great, especially since it's got free tier.
Yeah, and another quick launch from Perplexity. They launched their desktop agent, personal computer they call it, which is now available on the Windows. And it's good because you, as I said earlier in the introduction, that you want to bring AI to the data, not necessarily data to the AI. And data in the context exists on the desktop, in the files where people actually work, in the software that. So this desktop agent actually helps operate within that context and ecosystem without having to take all the data up in the cloud, etc. So that's the advantage of this, and it is now available on the personal computer as well. It used to be available only on the Mac. It kind of like directly try to compete with the Microsoft 365, like basically that kind of copilot, that ecosystem. Of course, it is not as integrated, etc. But that's where it is trying to operate.
And let's get into another launch piece here. So Grok 4.5, that's obviously been out, but two things with 4.5. One is this notion of a build mode. We're seeing this a lot. I mean, obviously, in my opinion, Grok's a little bit late to the game here, but this concept of being able to build code. So this lets a user basically describe the application that they want in chat, and then Grok will go off and write the code and then render a working preview. There's obviously a lot of equivalencies, whether or not I'm using GitHub Copilot or Codex, now ChatGPT work, or Claude Code. So this has been around. To me, it's sort of like, okay, you're at the table now. Welcome, thank you very much. As far as what, I don't know what to call them anymore, X, right? SpaceX, XAI, right? XAI/SpaceX. So this is something that's available now. It is limited somewhat to paid subscribers. I think you actually have to be at the heavy or whatever that is called inside of Grok. Separately, though, and I think this one's a little bit more of the impactful one, is that Grok 4.5 is now available inside of the GitHub Copilot environment. So obviously, if you're using GitHub Copilot, you can use it in several different IDEs or go straight to GitHub Copilot, but that allows you to build agentic workflows using either the Copilot CLI or Visual Studio Code or these other pieces, but allows you to pick a model that you want. Now with Grok 4.5 in there, this opens it up to the millions of developers or users of GitHub Copilot. So I look at it as, well, it's nice to have the build mode inside of Grok. That the amount of people that probably have that higher level paid tier of Super Grok is far less than the GitHub Copilot. So now, if you're a user of GitHub Copilot, take a look, because you've got Grok 4.5 available to you. And some of the analysis is that Grok 4.5 is a very capable model. So it's another tool in your tool belt for whatever you're trying to develop.
Okay, and I think that's a wrap for the week. Lots of news, slightly longer episode. Apologies for that, but we're always trying to contain. But don't blame us. Too many things happening in the world.
Yeah, and that is definitely true. So as we always say every week, it's about tell your friends, subscribe, follow if you're not already, and you're listening to this for the first time. Welcome and subscribe. We're on several different platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, and Apple Podcasts, to name a few. So until next week, have a good weekend.
Bye everyone. Bye Jimmy.
Catch you later.